This is a sensation. The Ukrainian armed forces have dealt a harsh blow to the Russian army right on the front lines. Putin can't believe his eyes. The encirclement is closing. A sharp turn of events. Trump did it. The US has brought Russia to its knees before the eyes of the whole world. After this, Putin himself will be begging for peace. Italy is urgently entering the game. Mega aid for Ukraine is heading toward the front while the Kremlin is left gnashing its teeth. Shock. Moscow's last breath. A strike on Latvia. A mysterious train has triggered the start of a war against NATO. We have the first details ready. Kyiv is arming the world. All this in our broadcast. Hellpoint. A fantastic triumph of the Ukrainian armed forces at the front. It's simply impossible to hide this anymore. A column of brazen Russians has been wiped out. Epic footage. Near Zaporizhzhia, our forces gave the enemy a taste of birch porridge. A bomb exploded, and Russian generals still can't catch their breath after such a treat. And that's not all. Our forces are advancing in Donbass. The counter-offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces continues, and the tension is at its peak. Putin, sitting in his train car, clings to Pokrovsk and gives the order to break through straight to Kherson. However, there's a problem. They ran out of ammunition even before the assaults began. Unknown drones did their job. Don't miss all the hot details about this. Coming up in the next segment.
The Ukrainian armed forces have thrown a wrench into Russia's plans near Pokrovsk. Military analysts report that Moscow's plan to capture the city has failed, and it's all thanks to the incredible efforts of the defense forces in the Dobropilya area. It seems that Russia has realized there is no longer any point in expecting a breakthrough in this direction, and they decided to go from encirclement tactics to classic meat assaults on Loba.
Those specific units of the Russian army that were waiting in the south, in the southwest, will be taken prisoner from the north, Pokrovsk, and then we'll start squeezing this ring. But despite the difficulties they encountered, they remained loyal to their people. Additionally, the command of the Russian army apparently gave the order to return to direct frontal assaults, Pokrovskaya. For the most part, the Pokrovsk urban battles are already beginning in the south.
At the same time, despite increased activity from the southern part of the city, this has not brought the Russians any significant success. The number of attacks has also increased in another Donetsk direction, the Kupiansk direction. At the same time, the enemy is also unable to build up their forces. As a result, the only thing left for the saboteurs is to disguise themselves as civilians and try to advance deeper into the settlement, essentially without any equipment.
There are, let's say, positive trends in the Kupiansk area because the defense forces are not allowing the Russians any opportunities. For example, to set up those same crossings across the Oskil River, and the Russians are unable to bring in more reserves. As of today, they are unable to bring in, among other things, mechanized components, which of course has made it more difficult for them to operate in the city of Kupiansk, although sabotage and reconnaissance groups, as well as attempts to disguise themselves as civilians, are present among the Russians here. In
turn, experts link the Russian activity in Donetsk region to Russia itself, and to Putin's direct order to capture the region at any cost before the onset of cold weather. After all, the upcoming negotiations do not promise Moscow any territorial exchanges or voluntary surrender of the region.
The position was clearly not Gerasimov's but Putin's. The order was to urgently capture Pokrovsk, seize Dobropilya and Kostiantynivka, and to have the prospect of fully conquering the region by winter. The conquest of Donetsk region. That's why the attacks that are being carried out now are aimed specifically at creating a strike force and breaking through the defenses.
Further confirmation that Ukraine is not going to give up Donetsk region came from a statement by a separate assault regiment of the armed forces of Ukraine, Skelia the Rock. In particular, the soldiers showed how they are clearing out the occupiers, the settlement of Torsky in the Lyman direction. During the fighting, about 100 Russians who were holed up in abandoned houses were eliminated. Now the Ukrainian flag flies over Torska once again. The Zaporizhzhia direction also remains hot these days. There, the occupiers once again tried to break through the defensive line using dozens of heavy armored vehicles.
the enemy attempted to launch an attack with a mechanized column, deploying more than 30 pieces of heavy equipment. We're talking about the small Takmachka area. This was, let's say, the climax of this battle. As a result, the enemy was repelled there. Most of the equipment was destroyed even before reaching the direct line of engagement.
But even after such news in the coming months, the Russians will not stop trying to use heavy equipment in assaults, experts explain. The point is that small assault groups are no longer able to break through the AFU's defensive rings. Motorcycles also no longer work. Our FPV operators have gotten used to attacking these targets as well. Armor remains the only option. The
Russians do this deliberately. They use tanks, MTLBs, and IFVs as disposable vehicles, just to advance by a few hundred meters or perhaps even a kilometer or two if possible, or at the very least, to move forward by at least 100 meters. The objective is to advance, to make progress, so that the infantry can then try at close range to reach those specific areas where they are gathering, assembling, and preparing. This movement is crucial as it allows the infantry to get close enough to attempt to reach those positions where the enemy forces are currently concentrated.
But even knowing that they are being sent one way together with the equipment, Russian assault troops obediently go on the breakthrough. As is repeatedly confirmed, today the entire command model is tailored for this. Those who refuse are shot by their own.
With us, it's still more or less, but further down, closer to the front lines, if anyone even tries to run away, they're immediately shot. At first, we even became friends, only hung out with him. You just have to act normal. There's nothing to wear, or they take it from you. Well, no, you get wiped out, they wipe you out. That's how it is.
Russian propaganda is trying in any way it can to boost the morale of its boys. For example, recently TASS made a loud statement that the Russian armed forces are already in Kherson. It was claimed that paratroopers had landed in the remote Korabel district of the city, but this fabrication didn't even last a day on the front pages.
TASS and VovSU quickly deleted the reports about the successes of the Russian armed forces on Quarantine Island, where the Kherson neighborhood of Korabel is located. The publication by the state news agency stated that Russian troops had successfully landed on the island, taken control of key facilities, and repelled all attempts of counterattacks by the Ukrainian armed forces. The reports were deleted.
But it seems our special services have shown what it really means to operate effectively behind enemy lines. The destruction of a military factory in Kopeisk, many analysts attribute it specifically to them, although the Ukrainian side has not yet given any official confirmation. As of now, it is known that 12 people have died at the facility and another 10 are considered missing. Judging by satellite images, the aftermath of the explosions completely destroyed the Plasmas factory, at least one of the workshops which was involved in the production of ammunition.
The defense enterprise AO Plasmas plant is engaged in the production of a wide range of munitions including artillery shells, mortar rounds, tank projectiles, and unguided rockets. The enterprise has undergone modernization, the construction of new workshops, and the expansion of infrastructure since 2023.
But as for ammunition for the armed forces of Ukraine, it seems that, on the contrary, their supplies will increase. Recently, a meeting of the coalition of the Resolute took place in London, the main message of which was a significant increase in the supply of long-range weapons to Ukraine.
Putin's fiasco has reached its peak. Trump has finally turned his back on Moscow. Negotiations have been cancelled and the sanctions have finally started to work. The suppression of the dictator's empire has begun. In Washington, they are not hiding their emotions. They watch the Kremlin's panic with a smile. What a turn of events! Russia is trying to cling to at least its last chance of salvation. Putin is falling at Xi Jinping's feet. The Celestial Empire is not thrilled with this turn of events. China is getting nervous along with Russia. Will Trump see things through to the end? And how deadly will the White House's next move be? All about this in the following report. Trump has become disillusioned with Putin. For the first time, he officially cancelled a meeting with the Russian president in Budapest and struck a blow to Moscow. With powerful sanctions, the president wants to see action, not just talk. I think the president is extremely motivated by the success of his peace deal in the Middle East. He wants to achieve the same result here, and he wants this war to end. He has been repeating this for 9 months while in office, and he is becoming increasingly frustrated by the lack of progress from both sides. In this war, sanctions have been imposed against Russia's largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. The reason is that Moscow has no desire for a ceasefire. For many, this statement only brought a smile. The Kremlin's opposition has long been well known. But Trump seems to have only just realized this. Then the Russian army had a hand in this. As CNN reports, Trump decided to tighten sanctions against Russia after the strike on a kindergarten in Kyiv. It was this strike that became a turning point for Trump. He decided to act more toughly, but still not as tough as Ukrainians would have liked. And the Wall Street Journal confirms this. According to the publication, Trump was offered 3 options for sanctions against Russia. The strictest option targeted Russian industry and the country's top leadership, the middle one targeted Russia's energy sector, and the softest included limited measures. The American president chose the middle option. In terms of severity,
Trump, he plays from a business perspective. And when he chose the option that was in the middle, my logic is as follows. He shows Putin that things could be better or they could be worse. And right now it's like this. And that, apparently, words have already run out. In other words, faith in Putin's words has come to an end.
the Russian dictator himself has taken his usual stance, insisting that Russia doesn't care about the sanctions. He stated that supposedly the new sanctions will not significantly affect Russia's economic well-being.
An attempt to put pressure on Russia. But no self-respecting country and no self-respecting people who hold their independence and dignity in high regard ever make important decisions or take significant actions while under pressure or coercion from others.
Trump did not let it go unanswered.
Putin stated that Russia is not vulnerable to sanctions from the states.
I'm glad he thinks so. Let's see in 6 months.
The sanctions are actually quite serious. This has already affected responsible purchases of Russian oil, in particular not only by Indian but also by Chinese state-owned oil refining companies. Again, this will impact a large portion of Russia's global oil exports. So, of course, all this will hit Russian revenues, but naturally with his
Statement, Putin has essentially ruled out the possibility of ending the war. At the same time, the Kremlin still insists that a meeting between Putin and Trump could take place in the future. No.
Neither Trump nor Putin. They talked about this. They don't want to waste time. They don't want to meet just for the sake of meeting, only for the sake of an actual meeting. For the meeting to be productive, it is necessary that at the level as defined by the heads of state, the Russian foreign minister, and the U.S. Secretary of State, work has been done.
But there's no need to expect it to happen anytime soon. Trump wants to finally see actions from Russia, not just hear about them. And Putin himself has no intention of doing this, no intention at all. And his reaction to the new restrictions?
On the one hand, Putin, of course, could make some concessions, but after sanctions were imposed on him, concessions in Putin's worldview would mean showing weakness. That is, it would mean he was forced to make concessions under the threat and imposition of sanctions. And he keeps repeating that the sanctions don't work, that they play no role at all, that the sanctions are only beneficial for Russia, and everything in that vein. So for him, it's purely ideologically in this situation, he simply cannot accept that he was forced into such negotiations by sanctions. Therefore, it's clear that right now, the question of a meeting between Trump and Putin is not relevant.
But Putin could still be convinced of the opposite. There is only one person who can do that, Xi Jinping. And it's pure coincidence. Trump is meeting with him on October 30th.
I think that Trump will even try to make use of Xi Jinping's influence on Vladimir Putin. However, just how significant that influence actually is, that's the real question. It seems to me that we tend to exaggerate things, as if Xi says something and Putin simply sits there like a perfectly trained dog and does absolutely nothing. Because there are completely different mechanisms at play there. Does China want this war to stop? No, of course not. Right now, China has everything it needs except for these sanctions, which are currently irritating it.
American sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil are hitting the Chinese oil market. China has already stated that the restrictions supposedly have no basis in international law and were not approved by the UN Security Council. However, it is possible that this is exactly the kind of pressure that was needed. Xi Jinping is dissatisfied and may force Putin to act.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Storm Shadow missiles, Puma armored personnel carriers, and more. Italy's silent support has now spoken out loud and clear. This is a breakthrough. The curtain has been lifted for the first time. Rome has extended a helping hand and struck Moscow hard. NATO is bursting in like a raging beast. Putin is starting to seriously panic. The power of the Ukrainian armed forces on the battlefield is now reaching unprecedented heights. Our ally isn't stopping, something explosive is in the works. What exactly it is and how it will affect the course of events on the battlefield, we'll go into more detail in just a moment.
The assistance from this country is not being publicized. However, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Italy is another partner helping our country in the fight against the Russian occupiers. The country has significant experience in producing air defense systems and their munitions. Currently, a lot of attention is being paid to the prospects of joint production of these weapons in cooperation with our country.
It's important to understand that any European country that says we are ready to launch production for military manufacturing is important to Ukraine. Because one way or another, the military equipment produced in the European Union will end up in Ukraine. Because many people, not only in Ukraine, but also in Europe, in the European Union and in Ukraine itself, when modeling the situation, say that after Ukraine, Russia will take its war to other countries on the European continent. That's why more attention needs to be paid to weapons production.
It should be noted that assistance to Ukrainians is being provided against the backdrop of internal political struggle within Italy itself. In 2025, 192 deputies supported aid to our country, while 41 lawmakers voted against it. Nevertheless, at the moment, the Italian government is officially able to support Ukraine and supply weapons until December 31, 2025.
And different parties are, let's say, taking almost opposite positions. That is, when we talk about political life in Italy, we can recall that Salvini has been and remains an influential politician in Italy. And it is believed, and there even seems to be evidence, that he has ties to Russia. However, at the start of the full-scale war, Salvini demonstratively supported aid to Ukraine. So in principle, he did not behave as clearly pro-Russian politicians in the European Union do.
According to experts, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni takes a rather tough stance.
Nevertheless, it is Meloni herself who is, at least in the public sphere and in the eyes of many observers, the primary author and driving force behind the proposal. If Russia is opposed to the idea of Ukraine joining NATO, then let's not formally admit Ukraine to NATO, but instead simply extend the protection of NATO's Article 5 to cover Ukraine as well.
As of today, it is known that Italy is participating in the supply of Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine, together with the British and French governments. In addition, there have also been deliveries of Puma armored personnel carriers, which the government has never reported in the media or emphasized in official
documents. That is, accordingly, Italy, as one of the leading and most influential countries of the European Union, cannot simply stand aside or remain passive. Otherwise, it risks missing out on an important and valuable opportunity.
Moreover, Italy has gone even further in supporting Ukrainians and is trying to minimize the purchase of Russian energy resources. Furthermore, in
2022, there was a report that for the first time since 1976, Italy went a whole week without buying gas from Russia. This, of course, was a very significant step, and Italy took it.
Italy is not as steadfast in its informational support for Ukraine as it could be. However, its actions speak about its position on Ukraine better than any words could. Experts note that the Prime Minister of Italy also has good relations with US President Donald Trump, which allows her to facilitate communication between the US and the European Union regarding assistance to Ukrainians.
Tensions are rapidly rising in the Baltics and not without reason. The Kremlin is once again following its old playbook, Ukraine 22. Under the guise of fighting imaginary Nazism, Moscow is once again whipping up hysteria. The final stage has begun. The Russian dictator is testing NATO's nerves and probing the weak spots of the eastern flank. Entry into alliance territory thanks to the WOW train. Putin's decisive plans have leaked to the world. Suwalki Corridor, attention. Evacuation is about to begin. Will the West manage to stop the dictator in time, and should we expect a retaliatory strike from NATO? Find out in just a moment.
Representatives of NATO countries, especially in Europe. In small countries, they really need to fully realize what they're dealing with.
After Ukraine, the Baltics.
Russian people are just simply being thrown out across the border. These are, in fact, very serious matters that directly affect the security of our country.
Vladimir Putin is a threat not only to the security of Ukraine, but also to other independent states. The Latvian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has officially denied permission for a plane carrying Putin to fly through its airspace. This decision is not just a diplomatic gesture. It is a direct reminder to the Kremlin that in the civilized world, Putin is the subject of an international criminal court warrant. And immediately after that, a new provocation from the Kremlin. Russian military aircraft violated Lithuanian airspace. NATO fighter jets were scrambled to intercept them.
This is a blatant violation of international law and of territorial integrity of Lithuania. This once again confirms the importance of strengthening the readiness of European air defense forces.
Before this, Russian fighter jets were over Estonia. 2 more aircraft of the Russian Federation appeared over the Petro-Baltic oil platform in the Baltic Sea. Russia has intensified provocations against NATO countries in September. The Kremlin systematically employs hybrid forms of aggression.
In 3 months, Russia produces as much ammunition as all NATO countries combined do in a year. We expect that this year, the Russian military-industrial complex will produce 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, and 200 missiles. Iskander. And in just 5 years, Russia could be ready to go to war against NATO.
For Putin, the capture of Ukraine is not the goal, but a stage. His plans involve resurrecting the Soviet sphere of influence, where the independence of neighboring countries is only temporary. A misunderstanding. Those
in countries that were considered to be among the least friendly, notably where there are more relocants, Putin received 56.82% of the vote. Veikko in Estonia, 75.22%. In Latvia, a total of 70.6% of the population.
In addition to military provocations, the Russians are carrying out various cyber attacks.
Estonia plans to increase its military spending to 5.4% of GDP within 4 years. And right now, Estonia is already strengthening its border with our country.
Russia can come up with hundreds of pretexts for invasion. The Kremlin has already found familiar narratives for the Baltic countries to justify its invasion.
In fact, it really can be called fascism when the authorities do everything possible for forced assimilation, including of ethnic Russians and other peoples. Therefore, of course, everything that is happening now in Latvia is a tragedy. In fact, the same enemies are present there.
They openly declare the liberation of brotherly nations, the granting of additional rights and freedoms, as well as support for Russian speakers. And already today, in the narratives of Kremlin propaganda, Narva is portrayed as a city where Russians are actively oppressed by Estonians.
The Russian language is not taught as such, not even as an elective. And that's why I'm changing jobs, moving to an Orthodox gymnasium where the Russian language and culture are preserved.
The Kremlin has already outlined plans to increase military production and deploy additional troops along their borders, according to the Institute for the Study of War.
Kremlin officials continue to use the same narratives toward the Baltic countries that Russia has used to justify its invasions of former Soviet republics over the past 3 decades.
The Kremlin continues to chase phantoms. The next target could be the Moscow-Kaliningrad passenger train, which passes through Lithuanian territory. The Kremlin is quite capable of using it as a pretext for invasion, supposedly to rescue peaceful.
Russians are people who come from Russia, a country that spans Eastern Europe and Northern Asia. They are known for their rich culture and primarily speak the Russian language.
They could also stage a provocation in the Suwałki corridor on the border.
This area is located in the border region that separates the countries of Lithuania and Poland, 2 neighboring nations in northeastern Europe. It is a stretch of land that lies directly between these 2 countries, serving as a boundary and point of connection. To break through a corridor at this spot for the supply of Kaliningrad.
In Putin's worldview, not only the Baltic countries and Ukraine must submit to Russia, but also part of Poland and Finland.
If Russia really wants to seize the Baltic countries, it will have to do so very quickly. The vulnerable period, which of course implies war, must be minimized as much as possible in order not to reveal their intentions.
Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are concerned about the increase in Russia's military spending. That is why they are developing a plan for the mass evacuation of 1 million people in the event of a Russian invasion. At the same time, they firmly believe that NATO's Article 5 will still work.
We've been having this conversation since February 2022. Even since March 2014, when Russia first attacked Ukraine and annexed Crimea. The US is no longer willing to defend Europe, as I say, for free. They want Europeans to do their part of the work. I think that's fair. Of course, it's not easy because it means having to cut spending. For example, less funding goes to education, healthcare, and social security. But we, as a frontline state, understand what's at stake. And coming back to Article 5, people often mention the Budapest Memorandum and compare Ukraine and NATO guarantees. But there is a difference, and it's a very significant one. Ukraine is not a member of the alliance, and the fact that Russia is so fiercely opposed to Ukraine joining NATO and receiving Article 5 guarantees, to me, is actually proof. Article 5 works.
The scenario of a sudden strike on the alliance's eastern flank is no longer a fantasy. It has become a matter of time and of the West's readiness to respond. Latvia has tightened its immigration rules. Those Russians who did not pass the exam or did not submit their documents for EU permanent resident status on time are required to leave the country in Latvia. In addition, starting from November 1st, irregular bus passenger transportation will be prohibited from Latvia to Russia and Belarus. At the border with Russia, the restoration of swamps and peatlands will begin to create a natural barrier in case of aggression. For now, NATO remains confident that an open conflict with Russia can be avoided, at least as long as the Kremlin is preoccupied with the war against Ukraine. However, history teaches us what seemed impossible yesterday may become reality today.
Ukraine is once again turning everyone's attention. A global wow effect. Reality hits the Kremlin's plans for dominance like a heavy suitcase. Our people hold the line like skilled conductors. They keep ramping up the pace and don't give the enemy a moment's peace. The conveyor is running at full capacity. Sea drones are storming the waves, missiles are hitting the bullseye, and artillery is drawing its own maps in fire. And this is only the first episode. The Ukrainian defense industry is receiving worldwide applause. The question of what's next is already in the air. Don't miss the answer to it. Coming up in the next segment.
The Ukrainian defense industry is ramping up its pace. Ukraine is becoming a global leader in weapons production.
Europe must help Ukraine become a steel porcupine that no aggressor can overcome.
The security service of Ukraine has showcased new Sea Baby maritime drones, which have already been tested in combat. In the new version, the babies are capable of traveling over 1,500 kilometers and carrying up to 2 tons of cargo. 2 versions have been presented. One is equipped with a machine gun mount and an automatic target recognition and tracking system. The second is the Grad maritime platform with 10 MLRS rockets.
Our drones have shifted the balance of power in the Black Sea and have proven their effectiveness. The new generation of Sea Baby is even more effective. Therefore, the work to clear the Black Sea of the Russian fleet will continue.
In addition, the upgraded drones are equipped with more powerful engines and a modern navigation system. Earlier, in June 2025, new models of maritime drones were used during the attack on the Crimean Bridge.
We approached by land, we approached across the water surface, and in 2025, we approached underwater. There were 2 strikes, each with a force equivalent to 1.1 tons of TNT. As a result, its key supports, the so-called piers, were seriously damaged. Essentially, the bridge today operates with a load limit of no more than 5 tons. And when it decides, it decides, when it decides, it decides, when it decides, it decides, then it decides, it decides, when it decides, it decides, then it decides, it decides, when it decides, it decides, then it decides, it decides.
Ukraine's allies are in no hurry when it comes to supplying long-range missiles, which the armed forces of Ukraine could use to destroy legitimate military targets of the occupiers deep in Russian rear areas.
A story in the Wall Street Journal about this. The US has allegedly approved Ukraine's use of long-range missiles to strike deep inside Russia. Fake news. The US has nothing to do with these missiles.
Kyiv, for its part, has focused on producing a wide range of its own long-range missiles and drones, which are regularly used to strike Russian territory.
It's an absolute nightmare. Everything feels completely out of control, and the situation just keeps getting worse. It's getting wild, with unexpected things happening all the time, making it hard to keep up or even understand what's going on. I love it.
As of today, Ukraine produces dozens of long-range missiles like the Long Neptune and Flamingo every month, as well as thousands of long-range and rocket-powered drones.
In order to somehow put this war into a stalemate, to turn the tide, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front lines, but also to strike at their logistics and take down their aviation. That's why it's necessary, and I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at Russia's military-industrial complex enterprises and its energy system.
Weapons manufacturers also haven't forgotten about the Ukrainian goddess of war, Badana. This year, Ukraine has become a world leader in the production of self-propelled artillery systems.
Artillery remains the queen, and Ukraine has mastered the production of howitzers.
Despite the role of FPV drones on the front line, artillery has several advantages over unmanned aerial vehicles. First, the range of engagement. For the Bodana, this figure reaches up to 45 kilometers. Shells are inexpensive and immune to radio interference, and they are also extremely effective against enemy infantry.
In other words, these are completely different capabilities for striking both enemy personnel and equipment, as well as key points of the enemy's permanent deployment. If the Epidron targets a single objective, meaning a specific serviceman of the occupying army, then accordingly the capabilities of the Bodana self-propelled artillery system are to work against groups. In other words, it is what counters the so-called local assaults by Russian occupiers.
A protracted war and heavy defense require quick and effective solutions from Ukrainian military engineers. While Russian occupiers continue to dream of demilitarization, Ukraine is gradually becoming the world's largest arms forge.
That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hatsakalo. There will be even more scorching news in our next episode. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you